So, Greg, thank you for joining us. Well, I was going to say this morning. It's your morning, it's my afternoon. We always struggle with our time zones and thwarting our attempts to connect.
We'll
But
just call
thank
it
you for making
today.
the time. Today, some point today. It's today in England and today in Los Angeles. Either way you shake it. Um, it's great to have you make the time to talk to us. I'm sort of fascinated to hear some of your views on the state of the nation and also to talk to you a bit about Remoto, which is a thing that I've been looking at a lot and talking to people about a lot to find out how it came about and explain to people what it does. But I wanted to start, if we might, with your kind of your footprint, the businesses that you run in Los Angeles, which to the naked eye probably look quite similar but do different things. I'm sure you've told the story a million times, but if you could just give us an idea of what what your footprint is there as it stands
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Um, it started off in the foreign language dubbing business. And so a company called SPG Studios, which I have a background in actually on the investments and finance side of things. I'm not a native of the industry, but I came into the business having purchased SPG Studios from a guy who was retiring um, and got into the foreign language dubbing business. Uh, and along the way, met a guy in Southern California who, because we inherited a facility when I bought the company that, as as we've seen many times in our industry, what you have over time or over generations isn't as suitable. 10 years on, 15 years on, some of these facilities were going on 20 years old, and so they needed to find new purposes, be repurposed. And I met a guy along the way who was like, this is really interesting what you have here. I'll tell you what's even more interesting is if you got into just straight ahead post production audio, because there's an opportunity here to really enter the boutique market space in Southern California, where you have both established studios along with a couple of independent post audio specialists. And in LA, the market is still very specialized, where you offer post services in silos, picture services here, and maybe VFX there, color somewhere else, and audio somewhere else. So started off with SPG Studios, and then expanded into building facilities from scratch for what's now called Signature Post, an independent post production facility that has two locations, both in the western side of West LA, Santa Monica area, and then Burbank. Um, yeah, so the businesses are, in some way, to an outsider like myself, or at least an outsider that I used to be, are quite similar. Both providing audio services to customers, but when you get into the weeds, obviously different customers, different kinds of specific services. Uh, the foreign language dubbing business, although we don't do a ton of recording in Los Angeles, was built for recording. Um, we have studios internationally and became very aware, acutely aware of some of the challenges of recording internationally, which will lead us back to Remoto in a second. The Signature Post, most of our facilities are around mixing environments. So we have Atmos stages. We do have ADR recording stages as well for that part of the editorial process. But you're dealing much more in a talent-driven. You're as we talk about internally. One of these companies provides its services kind of behind the scenes. The foreign language dubbing company customers are generally not sitting in and watching you work. And then on the other side, the flip side, at Signature Post, your customers are joining you for a good chunk of the mix experience to be collaborating with our people on staff, on site.
Yeah, I guess foreign language dubbing is almost post, if you
It's
see what I
funny you
mean.
say that. That's exactly how. And when I first came to the industry, and people said, "Well, you're not quite post production, are you?" And I said, "No, I don't know if this is a term, but it's post.
Right. Okay.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
operations, it's versioning, it's distribution. Different places call it different things, but yeah, the project is 100% locked and finished. It's an original language, and then the foreign language dummy people get a crack at it. Although there are those who are t- uh, working within those confines to say, we can do foreign language dubbing more efficiently if we're brought in earlier in the process. And for some larger feature productions that are willing to sort of integrate earlier, there are efficiencies to be gained. But the more traditional legacy kind of workflow is you finish in your source language and then you begin to version. So yeah, this brings me back to Remoto, but I don't know if I don't want to cut you off if there's other questions about that part of it. It's a funny thing because these two marketplaces, I thought if you do one and I do the other, we're audio specialists. But the customers regard these services pretty distinctly. So operationally, the vendors, it's the same vendors, it's the same core skill sets, but from a customer facing point of view, these are pretty discrete companies.
No, exactly. And I think you've got, there's a different, they kind of operate at different speeds a little as well, I think. You've got a very, very niche operation in SPG, but that has a regular beat of throughput because there is this machine that requires content in different languages, which is a lot less volatile, I would imagine, you tell me, than the day-to-day post-production audio.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when in the post audio world, a project, shifts a month or four at the drop of a hat because you're at the end of a sequential post production process and something upstream has stalled or a picture gets unlocked after being locked. Whereas, yeah, with dubbing, for the most part, your clients are saying to you, here's the slate, here's the timing. It's already finished in that other language. There are times where, I mean, we do work for HBO and some of their, I mean, they're very artist friendly. And so there are times where we are engaging in our dubbing workflows immediately on the heels of picture locking. In fact, there are times where we are frequently actually in our workflow for that particular client, we are recording or translating at least, and sometimes even recording to temp picture and then going back and, oh, they've changed this, they've changed that. We're going to go back and do pickups now. But yeah, for the most part, it's a more sequenced process that's finished before you start. I'm
Makes
sorry,
sense.
your precursor workflow is finished before you start.
Right. And then all of this does lead us to the kind of origin story or the genesis of Remoto. I wanted to touch because you've come at this from a very different angle than the kind of the standard issue backstory of working one's way up through being a track lay or junior mixer, dubbing mixer, getting an opportunity to start your own shop kind of thing. When you came at this kind of sideways, you had business skills that you transferred to this very particular, very esoteric, very sometimes quite odd sector. Um, is that a fair assumption? Because you and I hadn't met until I think you weren't long into the business. I think it was sort of 6, 7 years ago that we first spoke. I think does
Yeah,
that sound
something
about
like
right?
that. Yeah. Yeah, it's not the typical journey when I meet people in the industry. Generally, people are not reciprocating with, "Oh, that sounds just like my journey." Right now, their journey is much more as you described. Um, I have an entrepreneurial track record and like picking up new challenges, and so the dubbing business was intended to be just a standalone challenge. But I really liked the business, really liked being adjacent to some of the artistry that goes on, and my wife also happens to be in the business. She's a television and feature film director, so it sort of organically grew from some of our personal relationships as well. But the Remoto story 100% is dependent upon the existence of SPG and Signature Post. Never would have thought to start that unless I had that sort of hands-on experience. It was actually a specific experience with SPG at the start of the pandemic when we were dubbing Game of Thrones, and they came in and said, "We need you to keep recording." And we said, "Well, COVID restrictions, make that challenging. We can use remote tools." And they started asking us about the tools, and we said, "Well, it can be kludged together, but it can't be done, in the sort of TPN secure way that you expect." And that was the genesis. It was that, along with its Signature Post, sort of some of the same feelings of like, we have these problems doing ADR pickups. Um, we have a talent that's not in another studio environment where they could just go to that studio and we can patch into that studio. How do we meet them where they are? And of course, you have a business that's addressing one kind of solution for that problem, and we saw a different kind of a way to address that problem for certain other niche cases. And that was both those preceding companies, or not I guess they're preceding, but both the companies I was involved in sort of pointed the way to, there are people who are coming up with solutions that are either kludged. I'm not sure if that trend
It does.
expression
Yeah.
crosses
No,
the
it's
pond, as it were.
exactly the right word. Exactly the right
Okay.
word.
Or if it weren't kludged, then it is something that a consultant or an outsider is coming in to learn about the business, to try their best to come up with a solution set. Um, Whereas we were practitioners, we were the ones doing, we knew the workflows. And so it's a very typical software story, Ben. I expected, 6 months and a relatively small pile of money, and we would be done with a demo, at least a beta version. Frankly, it was going to be so inexpensive. I thought that it would just be a tool that my own companies used as a way to sort of distinguish themselves from others. But pretty quickly we realized, oh, this is why no one's done it before. It's hard, building infrastructure from the ground up, challenging domain territory that was sort of ceded to like OBS, which is never designed for the proper purpose, but is a large body of work created over many years by many people. We're doing that for ourselves just for this infrastructure. So it became something where we quickly pivoted and said, my companies will be customers of Remoto just like anyone else, but it's a tool that has much broader applicability than just what we're working on it in our shop.
No, it's interesting. You said a few things along the way, words and phrases in what you just said that just sprung out at me as being really relevant. One is COVID, the other one is kludged, and the third is not suitable for the purpose. And I think all
Yeah.
of us had the same. So just for the benefit of our audience, Remoto is a remote collaboration platform designed by an audio post production facility, primarily because all the other technologies available to you were in some way not right, or at least not on their own. And so all of us, to some degree or another, in COVID, and before that, it was already happening. COVID just accelerated it massively, were linking together studios where talent and technicians happened to be. And then the third party was always the exec, was always the director, the dialogue supervisor, somebody who had to get into the mix and participate in that. And that necessitated this this kludge, this kind of Frankenstein's monster of specialist tools that two recording studio environments could use to connect because they were very technically capable and were designed to do that. And that was fine until someone got involved who was in their car, who was at home,
Right.
who couldn't participate at that level technically. And so what tended to happen is the employment of tools that weren't built for that, things like Zoom. Um, at which point you're taking a very specific, very technical, where sync is important, where quality is important, and then you're suddenly dumbing that down to the lowest common denominator technically, in order to accommodate a wider group of people. So this is presumably the problem you were having, just like everyone else was.
Exactly. And I would add one more theme, macro theme there, which is, I can still remember getting on my first Zoom in 2020 or whatever it was. I don't think I'd heard of the tool before. There were WebEx. There were these conference tools that you used when you wore a suit and tie to work, and or a very formal environment kind of thing. Um, and one of the trends that's also happened with the advent of the way we're communicating now with Zoom is just the expectation that work can meet you wherever you are, and that if let's get four people together, one of them can't be in the studio. Oh, that's okay. There must be a way to solve that, right? This notion that it's not only that. I mean, the expectation is people don't always come to the studio. Now it's woven in as almost a birthright that I can be somewhere else and we can still work.
That's a
And we saw
generational
that
thing, I think. That was 25 years ago. You had a client behind you on the sofa the whole time.
the whole
And
time.
then
Yeah.
even before COVID, I mean, you have a very unique set of issues in Los Angeles around the 405 and traffic and people going across town. And that started that move. People just stopped turning up, but wanted nonetheless to be present in a
Actually,
world that can accommodate that.
yeah, it's funny you say that because it is the 405, but it's also our studio in Mexico. I remember talking to one of our voice talents in Mexico City, It was a project. They were called back for some pickups. They drove 2 hours each way for a 20-minute session because Mexico City makes LA look like a joke when it comes to traffic.
Right.
And
Wow.
that's the case in a lot of cities where we're recording. Um, so and I was tempted when I was focused before a Remoto on what to do with SPG Studios as a strategic response to the fact that people want global recording. That's obviously the demand. The expectation is that you record voices in territory, as they say. Um, the thought that you can't only put one studio. You can go to Jakarta and have studios in 7 different parts of Jakarta, but that's not economic. If you have a location in Jakarta, that location is inconvenient to the vast majority of people who are going to be coming to see you just because of the city's layout. So this notion again of like, you know, I don't need to physically be where you are, but we can work together was really hammered into us, and it rang a bell. Like, why can't I, in a secure way, record that person so they don't have to drive 2 hours for 20 minutes? For a Marvel movie, they'll drive 2 hours, right? There is going to be tentpole quality productions that don't scrimp on any kind of ambiguity around security, around quality, and that's understandable. But that bar for the rest of us keeps on creeping up of like more and more things adapt to the what remote workflows can offer. And then you look at the landscape and it's either are you hardware or software based? Because if you would acknowledge that this can be done electronically, then it's just okay. Do you have to have the kit, as you would say? I mean, I remember in the early days of COVID, some of the people in the dubbing business were sending briefcases to their talent,
All the time.
right?
Yeah. Like
Right. With
posting microphones through letterboxes and saying, I don't even want it back because it's
Right.
just,
I don't even know how to clean it
yeah.
satisfactorily. Right. Early on, we were worried about that. But yeah, that whole the thing of like hardware's the way you start because it's the safest. It's the
Mm,
most controllable. And when you go to software, oh my God, the internet, network connectivity, and security, and it's a bigger bite. But it is, of course, the natural end result. And so when we architected Remoto, it was always going to be software, because one of the things that comes with software and dovetails on these trends that you're talking about, Ben, is it democratizes everything because now everyone has access to it wherever they are, not just really important, high caliber people who can't make it to the studio today, but how about people who don't work in studios typically, or who get to work in studios on a couple projects but have a body of work that doesn't necessarily run through higher caliber work? How about people who aren't in a large city where there is a lot of support, with a studio infrastructure, or the person who's on location. So for all those reasons, we just said the software architecture is the way to go, but the existing tools were put together at a time when the only requirement was, can it work? I don't know, it doesn't have to be convenient, it doesn't have to be secure, but can it work? And we aimed for that next tier. I sometimes tell the metaphor of you know um, compressed chlorine gas. I forget actually the specific gas, but refrigeration was possible because we knew how to make certain gases cold, and as they expanded, they chilled the air around them. But it wasn't until there was a refrigerator with a door handle on it and a place to put your beer, or with the vegetable tray specifically for that. Like, an appliance is what we are. It's the natural evolution of what we use as people. We look for things that are specialty built to accommodate what we need when we are doing familiar things. And that was our goal with Remoto, was to take the workflows that are in our business. They're going to, make them remote, but make them familiar.
Yeah. No, and that being the reason it exists shines out of it when you use it. So and I'd encourage people to go to remotopro.io where you can get a demo version. But even before you do that, I'll explain to our listeners um, the fundamentals as I see it of what Remoto is about, which is this kind of coalescence of all the sophistication that if I'm the studio, if I'm the audio mix tech, if I'm the mixer, all the sophistication that I need around control and around the settings that I need to have right. And then the kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing is everybody who's participating in that, if you have 7 different people in your session, 3 of whom might also be in studios, 2 of whom might not be. But the experience for them is completely devoid of all that complexity. It's anybody who's used Zoom, and because of COVID, we all lived on Zoom for the longest time. If you've used Zoom as a participant, you can absolutely use Remoto, but that doesn't mean it's simplified in that Zoomy kind of way for the person in control of the session. They have infinite amount of control over all aspects of what everyone's seeing, what everyone's hearing, the routing of all those things, without having to employ a combination of tools to do the same thing. And the minute you employ a combination of tools, something, somewhere, always thwarts your effort. It's some kind of routing, some kind of delay, some kind of sync that always gets in the way. Or if it doesn't, makes the whole thing just this abominable head fuck, basically, of stuff that isn't designed to work together. So yeah, I think that your description of designing the tool around where we've got to and what we now understand our needs are is absolutely right, I think.
Yeah,
Because we're
thank
audio
you for the kind.
people and we're post-production people, and we've come to understand through iteration what we actually need, and it isn't very sophisticated tools that some people can't use, and it isn't democratized simple tools that just aren't really up to it, particularly when you're working in an environment with Marvel, with HBO, with anybody that has legislation around security.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was starting to say thank you for the kind words. It's absolutely true. We have lived in the chair of, sat in the engineer's chair and needed to make it work, bring people online, run effective sessions. So we do understand. One of the things that we were just amazed at is how challenging it can be to configure a session on some of these other existing kludges. So scheduling needs to be, and Zoom that makes this terribly straightforward, right? It's click, click, click. I've got a session. If I want to save a preset, I've got a preset. I always meet with this team on this time on this week. I can just recall that, and we adopt that same methodology. And again, back to the appliance. The things that you need to do frequently are really simple. Um, uh, the power that you talked about, we're the only tool that offers 16 channels, so supporting Atmos through remote playback. Um, we're the only tool that offers time coded markers so that, and this gets to something about, when you know the flow, when it's one thing to say, like, we make you interact with your colleagues remotely. Hey, look, you can wave and see, we have video conferencing as well as the embedded stream. And like, once you get over the gee whiz factor of that, what are we all doing? We're all working on projects for clients, needing to usher something through an approval process that ultimately our paycheck comes from the quality and speed of that product, right? And the quality comes from the richness of the collaboration. So one of the things that we wanted to innovate on, or we saw an opportunity to innovate on, was, well, what does the person do when they have this meeting? The host of that meeting is collecting notes. Why? So that they can go back afterwards, address the notes, get approval, and move on to the next step. So what do they do when they collect those notes? Well, some people record it and then watch it back. Some people have a steno pad, a notepad, and they're jotting notes down. Some people are telling everyone, hold on, wait a second, sit tight, let me address this note. And then everyone sits there on their phone, working, doing something else, and then they reconvene, and the sessions are longer than they need to be because the work's being done sort of in real time. And we said, w- you can, what would be optimal is if you could just all be together, stop and pause and converse when there is a debate about whatever quality issue you might want to have, a discussion about. I mean, our tool is relevant for video as editorial as well as audio, but whether it's some aspect of the editorial, some aspect of the audio mix, when you have those notes and comments, you want, as the meeting host, to be able to go back afterwards, address them very efficiently, and go back to those people, say, "See, you said this, and here's what I did." So our tool enables those observers while they're watching with you to just make some note. They can click on some buttons and say, FX here or the music note here. They can specifically annotate them. And when the host is done with the meeting, they get this list importable back into Pro Tools, back into their NLE. That's time coded markers that say, oh, Janine, here's where Janine said she didn't like the color of the sky. I'll address that. Or here's where Bob said there was a problem that the laser sounded too artificial. Let me address that. but they're now working more efficiently so that the whole flow from before they even decided they needed to have the meeting, right? From planning and scheduling the meeting, running the meeting, addressing the notes, that's the cycle, and that's what we're trying to make sort of more organic to the flow for the professionals who are doing this day in and day out.
Yeah, I think the flow is the thing, right? Um, and there are a couple of very specific things in Remoto, and I'll grab some B-roll and I'll put it over the top of this so we can have that going while we're talking about it, and people can see it before they try it. But time coded markers is, I think, a really huge thing. That's something that's obviously not what you'd see in a product like Zoom, but but then, like I said before, it's still having that simplicity because what you'll find is when you have a bunch of people all collaborating, you want to get the technology out of the way between you and their feedback, between you and their valid points. And if the platform you're using is out of sync for somebody, or grainy for somebody else, or stuttering for that person, that becomes the feedback immediately. You can't
Right,
move on to what do you think about this scene
right.
if all they're thinking about is it's not in sync. And for various reasons, when you have multiple people on a call, inevitably someone isn't the same as the other people in terms of sync. So because they've got a Bluetooth headphone in that's introducing some sync, or they're watching on a monitor that introduces some delay or latency. So the ability, and I'll put this up as well, you'll see that on the screen, the ability to have individual control by each participant over their own sync. So they can slew back in or out if there's something in the chain that's causing them to be different. Because you can guarantee that with five people on a call, three of them are fine and two of them are out of sync. And that becomes the first X minutes of any remote review or
Yep.
spotting session is why aren't I in sync? So to get to the meat of what that process is for, which is sitting together, as you say, and getting to the next stage by collating and
Yeah.
dealing with everyone's notes
Yeah.
becomes the name of the game.
We sort of have this notion of that for some groups that meeting host is herding cats, distractedly going off on different tangents, getting distracted by a technical issue that might be very local, which we, as you said, we provide tools to help self-correct that. But one thing that we just introduced, push to talk, another example of that, where you've got the familiar rubric inside of a studio where we're in different rooms and the only way to talk to one another is to press your space bar. But in our tool, and we had tools that you could sort of mute everyone, just as if to say,
Well,
"Shh,
yeah,
let's all watch the
I was
stream
kind
and
of
get."
smiling for that reason because push to talk is just code for everyone's on mute.
Right, exactly.
They
But
have to actually do something to talk, which is great because it's another big problem.
exactly, and we offer sort of both sort of levels of push to talk. So if you really want to say something and you're really committed to it, go ahead and interrupt, or you could just absolutely cancel, mute everyone as the host and say, "I'm not letting anyone talk until we get through this scene," because I mean, I joke about herding cats, but you are bringing creative people together. Sometimes some people less creative, along with other people who are more creative, and they're making a collaborative decision or noting something that it can be challenging politically just to steer through that and get to, can we all coalesce around this one comment? And your job as the professional is to address the notes. So the more tools you have to get people through that process and not have to go and re-meet again or rehash the same thing, like that's all part of the stress of the time sensitive work that we're doing. So yeah, I mean, anyway, that's just more specific examples of how we try to empower the whole flow so that someone gets to approval, because that's ultimately what it's all about.
No, 100%. Get to the next pit, get to the next part, get to the next stage. And I think
Yeah.
we're good for, I mean, I'll put it up on the screen and I'll put it in the notes or whatever. But for anyone who wants to see and download and try Remoto, it's www.remotopro.io. And there you can, I think I'm right in saying, you can download the software because the application isn't something that one pays for. The application is free.
Right.
If you use it, you need to pay for the time and the number of people that you use. But as an application, it can live in your bag. It can live in your toolkit. You don't subscribe to it regardless of whether you use it. You have it, and if you use it, you pay for it, and that's that.
That's absolutely right. It's one of the things also architecturally that we're really proud of and is pretty distinct. about what playback offers. This new tool is the first of its kind, only of its kind, that offers people the right to pay as they go. I mean, large companies will have licenses where there's some secret billing a billing process, and they're metered like old taxi cabs were. But in this domain, we're talking about a scenario where someone can say, I need one session for a half hour for two people, and they can go and just purchase just that. Or if they want a subscription because they know they have 30 hours coming up over the next month and they want to economize, yes, you can get a subscription, but you don't have to. You can only use when you need it. And one of the things that that brings about is not just the pricing flexibility and the sort of, it's almost like more just that you don't pay when you don't use something. But besides those highfalutin ideas, there's this notion that is really important to me, which is that some of the existing tools that are relatively high priced and on a subscription, they're reserved for a certain group of people. Um, you don't have sort of equal access to it. And we talked to lots of supervisors who are like, I want to talk to my special effects person. I need to review something. Typically, they'll upload the material. I'll listen to it. I'll send them a note. They'll address the note, and we'll go back and forth over the wall of this sort of asynchronous model. But there's loss of fidelity in terms of they're not talking to one another, or the notes they're not as efficient because they're spending time asynchronously. But if they could just hop on the phone for 15 minutes, they could resolve that issue and be done. So that's the idea with playback, this idea that for a very low cost, have that one call, right? Have that one session get you through your day faster because you have three pending items now instead of seven, because you were able to just deal with several of them in real time with the person. And this kind of quick burst idea is again more organic to the flow. Because in the massive playback world of, whether you've got 10 or 20 or 30 people for a big playback, everyone's showing up on their best behavior. Those are special event kind of things. That's absolutely a relevant use case. But there's a whole lot of use cases where people would just want to hop on a quick call to collaborate with a colleague, not a decision maker, and they can power through their day faster if they had access to something that was sort of cheap and simple. So those kinds of informal, more frequent touch points throughout your day become relevant only when you have a tool that is easy to use like Zoom, but can support, 16 channels of audio, for example.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of that model. I mean, I think we all struggle with, and again, it's this whole notion of necessity being the mother of invention, and us learning a bunch of stuff in COVID that we've brought through with us. And one of those things is there's stuff that you need from time to time, and it sticks in the craw always to permanently subscribe to a piece of software, for example, that fits in that category. It's something you need and rely upon from time to time. And it may be a couple of months before I use it again, but I'm paying for it nonetheless. The idea it's there and it's always there whenever I need it is is the kind of thing you do when you've lived in that world. So that is another reason why it's obvious that it's come from um, an audio post production operation who said this is the other thing that pisses us off all the time. It's just let's stop doing that.
Every December is a painful one, right, in our business because
Well,
you've
yeah,
got all these subscriptions and things that you're paying for 12 months a year, and you're like, well, I'm not using it this month,
no,
but
exactly,
I'm
yeah,
paying for it.
no, it's really good. Yeah,
Yeah.
so thank you. And I'd say hopefully people will go to the website, download it, give it a whirl. That would be great.
Yeah, you
And I,
mentioned the free trial. Just to elaborate on that, you what happens is you get three sessions that are put into your, it's called the dashboard when you download the app and create an account. And so those three sessions, you can then just go ahead and schedule and play with like you would any other. You invite guests, uh, uh, set your media up, and off you go. It's a real product, or it's the real product. It's not degraded. The only limitation is that there's a certain amount of time. I don't think you can run like a 6-hour session for free kind of thing. But other than that, it is a quote unquote normal sort of session. So that's what's available on the website.
fantastic. Thank you, Greg. And beyond Remoto Playback, which is the product we've been talking about, I guess you guys have other things in the works.
Yeah, yeah. The platform that we built that I mentioned earlier, it took longer and cost more, but it was not an effort to build one product, but to build an underlying infrastructure that will enable a number of products to come. The first one out of the gate, we're very excited about. It's ADR. And as the name implies, it's about voice recording. So that product we expect to have out before the end of the year, at least in beta version. So we are looking for beta users for that. But yeah, a different use case, obviously around voice recording, not necessarily in any one slice of the business. I mean, it might be for television commercials, it might be for foreign language dubbing, it might be for feature film and TV, typical sort of ADR, and all sorts of other use cases in between. But yeah, the core idea is that you've got an engineer, a voice talent, and a director, along with as many observers, clients, or whoever's you may or may not want to invite. But those folks form essentially that core trio. Represents the group that then is engaged in a remote recording session. um, they're recording to picture, and that in a synced way. Files are uploaded and streamed to all the participants, and just like a live session, the director can say, you know what, let's go back to scene 104. Let me hear take three again. And no, I don't like the way that sounded. Next time, voice actor, please, I want you to inflect a little bit more the second part of that sentence. I really want to hear the power in your voice. And so they're then going back, recording again, sync to picture. And so the point is, it's a live session where you can have mini playbacks, if you will, inside of it, until you're comfortable with what you are ready to print and move on. And that session, those sessions, it's a sort of by the hour. You rent the room by the hour, and off you go record. So we're very excited about that.
What you're describing, I guess, is an ADR session in which the the protagonists are all in different places. So you might have talent in the right room with the right mic, but the director or the ADR supervisor or the dialogue supervisor might not be there because the talent's in Morocco shooting, but they find the right room. But you can run the ADR session and run cues back for the director, run beeps and wipes for the actor. You can run the whole session from somewhere else. That's fundamentally what you're describing?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are ways right
Wow.
now, if you get everyone to a studio, um,
Mm.
that you can use good quality tools. I mean, they're maybe a little pricey, but good quality tools to create a linked environment. But yes, when your director is in a, I don't know, in a hotel room or on location or not in the studio, yeah, that you don't have that capability. And then there are some environments where you're recording either scratch or something that doesn't have to be necessarily in a controlled environment. So that's right. Not all the parties have to be in the studio, and yet the remote record session can continue.
That's fascinating. I think so. We'll keep an eye out for that. That'll be with us at some point soonish, and we'll check back in
Not
with
as
you
fast
hopefully
as
on
I
that
would
one.
like, and much faster than their engineers would want me to tell them. But yes, no,
Yeah,
we as I
we'll be
said, we hope to have
non-specific about when, but soonish. Soonish
soonish.
seems
My
to
hope is by
work.
the end of 2025, again, we'll have beta users.
Fantastic. That's great. And then I guess it'd be also interesting to talk to you a little bit about beyond Remoto and Signature Post, the kind of market in general, the what kind of state of the nation. Obviously, whether that's here in the UK, anywhere in the world, in LA, um, we live in challenging times. What's your take on where we go next?
Yeah, they have been challenging times. I think some of the worst of them are behind us. Um, I don't think that means we're going to regress to the heady days of, just post COVID, but pre labor actions, and nor even necessarily the heady days right pre COVID. I think we will find, a middle ground. There has been a lot of challenge with excess capacity, and that capacity goes for facilities and people, and that's been a painful adjustment. And I'm sure you feel it where you are. I know here in Southern California, the drying up of opportunity has led to a lot of people leaving the business, or just being cranky because whereas they used to work, let's say 45 weeks a year, now they feel blessed if they can work half that. And
Hmm.
yet they have a cost of living and infrastructure that that doesn't support not working full time. So when the volume will come back a little bit, I don't know if it'll come back enough, um, which is to say, enough to support the way things used to be. But I do think that with some adjustment, there'll be some who leave the industry. There'll be some facilities that close, and over time, the supply and demand curves balance, um, somewhat uneasily, perhaps, but we're heading in that direction. The macro question of where we go in the longer term is one of trying to read the tea leaves of how people consume content and in what format. I have teenagers and I see how they interact with media. It suggests that
Hmm.
there's going to be more and more and more platforms and ways to entertain yourself, and you know legacy linear TV and features will be part of a crowded mix of options. So they will probably maintain a disproportionately dominant share for a very long time, but not forever, and with ever decreasing, incrementally decreasing relevance, which sounds horrible to say, but much like radio in the 1920s was, every family had a giant console. I think that's what they were called in their living room. And, 50, 60 years on, it was something that was, drive time, morning commute and evening commute dependent, for commercial radio. And then, now we're in a new era with podcasting and let alone satellite radio and so forth. And so, you find ever narrower niches that you burrow into. I don't think we're quite at that level, but I can see looking generationally out that those trends are at play. People have lots of ways to spend their free time.
Yeah, and I guess maybe coming at this, going back to our kind of discussion around your origin story into the sector, maybe your experience as an investor in a former life, kind of you've lived through this process in other sectors. It's no different. It's an industry right sizing based on changes. To kind of summarize that in
Yeah,
one maybe oversimplified sentence, and you've seen that in any number of sectors.
yeah, I have, and it has been that the entertainment industry is so bespoke in its production process and its decision making process and its value creation. I mean, in what other business? Well, there are certain technology products now, but if you go back long enough, there are very few businesses where you could, just through the alchemy of the right creative product, um, hit a lightning bolt and affect culture and economics, and that's increasingly challenging. Um, and the product is commodified a little bit. We still see breakouts and culture forming content that's coming out of our industry all the time, and it's inspiring, and I'm proud of us for that. But we are we are yelling in a more crowded marketplace, and that's just an inevitable uh, conflict that we'll have to reconcile with.
No, quite so. Well, I'm aware of time, Greg, but I wanted to say thank you for taking all the time that you have. I know how busy you are. And it's been great to talk to you about your origin story, about SPG and signature, and to get to know Remoto playback and some of the ideas you have for that going forward. I'll publish all the links so people can look into that in more detail. But it remains just for me to say thank you very much, Greg, for being our guest.
Oh, thank you for having me, and really enjoyed it.